What if the most unsettling part of ancient history is not collapse, but choice? In Utah, people built cliffside granaries like vaults, sealed them carefully, and then walked away without fire or war. They carved dense fields of symbols into rock, spirals, grids, human shapes, yet left no key to read them. They returned to certain walls for generations, adding new images without erasing the old, as if the past itself was being preserved on purpose. And in the desert, a cave holds traces of human survival across spans of time that modern life struggles to imagine. If the evidence survived, why didn't the explanation survive with it? Utah is a landscape shaped by distance, exposure, and restraint. Vast deserts, narrow canyons, and elevated plateaus limit movement and magnify consequence. In many places, a single decision, where to stop, where to store food, where to carve a mark, could determine whether a group endured or failed. These conditions did not just influence how people lived, they influenced what survived. Because Utah remained lightly developed well into the modern era, some archaeological sites escaped the cycles of farming, construction, and large-scale looting that erased evidence elsewhere. As a result, traces of ancient life often remain close to where they were last used. Storage structures still sealed, tools left in place, stone surfaces bearing repeated marks made by human hands over centuries. Yet preservation introduces a paradox. The more intact a site appears, the more sharply its unanswered questions stand out. When walls remain but words are gone, when structures endure but intentions vanish, history becomes less a record and more a negotiation between evidence and absence. Modern storytelling often treats ancient mystery as spectacle. Viewers are trained to expect collapse, invasion, or lost technologies, events dramatic enough to explain why a culture disappeared. But archaeology rarely offers such clarity. More often, it reveals patterns that are difficult to resolve into a single cause. Gradual withdrawal, shifting priorities, changing environments, or social realignment that leaves no visible scar. In Utah, this pattern repeats. People invested time and labor into places they did not permanently occupy. They returned to specific locations across generations without consolidating them into cities. They carved symbols whose meanings were apparently important enough to repeat, yet not important enough to preserve in a fixed, readable system. And in some cases, they made the same practical decisions again and again for thousands of years without ever formalizing them into permanent settlement. These behaviors challenge modern assumptions. Progress is not always linear. Permanence is not always the goal. Meaning does not always require explanation. The 10 sites that follow do not contradict established archaeology. They operate within it. Their significance lies not in overturning history, but in revealing its limits. They show how much human intention can be inferred from material remains and how much still escapes reconstruction when context disappears faster than stone. What remains across Utah is not evidence of failure, but of choice. Quiet choices, repeated choices, and choices that were never designed to be understood by anyone outside the moment they were made. 1. Range Creek Canyon leaving without collapse. Range Creek Canyon lies along the eastern edge of Utah's Book Cliffs, a place shaped by isolation. Steep canyon walls limit access. Long dirt roads discourage casual travel. For most of the 20th century, this geography functioned as protection. While many archaeological sites across the American Southwest were disturbed or looted, Range Creek remained largely untouched. When systematic archaeological access began in the early 2000s, researchers encountered something rare, a landscape that felt unfinished rather than ruined. Scattered along the canyon are pit houses, storage features, and rock shelters associated primarily with Fremont communities. These were not ceremonial showpieces. They were practical structures built for survival. The most striking are the granaries, small storage rooms constructed high on cliff faces sealed with stone and mud. Some are barely large enough to hold a season's supply of corn. Others are reinforced with careful masonry, positioned where animals and floods could not reach them. Building these structures required planning, cooperation, and risk. Materials had to be hauled upward. Builders climbed exposed rock faces. Mortar had to be mixed and maintained. These were not temporary caches. They represent long-term investment in a place expected to be used again. Below the granaries, pit houses tell a similar story. Floors were repaired. Hearths show layers of repeated use. Walls were reinforced rather than abandoned after a single season. Families lived here, cooked here, and returned here across years. Then the pattern stops. What makes Range Creek difficult to explain is not destruction, but its absence. There is no widespread burning, no evidence of violent conflict, no defensive restructuring. Food stores were not systematically emptied. Tools were left behind. The canyon was not abandoned in haste. Instead, it appears to have been withdrawn from. Several explanations remain plausible. Environmental stress is one. Late prehistoric droughts affected large portions of the region, and small changes in rainfall can destabilize farming systems in high desert environments. Social reorganization is another. Fremont communities were loosely connected rather than centralized. Migration or integration into neighboring populations could dissolve a settlement without leaving dramatic traces. A third possibility is functional change. Range Creek may have served as a seasonal storage and hunting hub rather than a permanent homeland, losing relevance as movement patterns shifted. Yet none of these explanations fully resolves the tension. People rarely abandon labor-intensive systems without clear pressure. Cliffside granaries are not built casually, nor left casually. The care invested in these structures suggests intention, both in their creation and in their abandonment. Range Creek therefore preserves a different kind of mystery, not collapse but restraint, not disappearance but decision. If a functioning place could be left behind without violence or explanation, then the challenge is not reconstructing what failed, but understanding why continuity was no longer chosen. 2. McConkey Ranch, a stone language without a translation. McConkey Ranch lies in northeastern Utah, where open grassland meets weathered rock. At a distance, the landscape appears ordinary, quiet, expansive, almost empty. The mystery only emerges when the cliff faces come into view. Hundreds of petroglyphs are carved into dark desert varnish, clustered so densely that the stone feels crowded with intention. Figures overlap, symbols repeat, styles shift. Together, they form one of the most concentrated rock art sites in the region. Most of the carvings are attributed to Fremont communities, dating broadly between 600 and 1300 CE. Yet attribution alone does not explain what is happening on these walls. The imagery does not resolve into a single scene or story. Instead, it accumulates. Anthropomorphic figures dominate many panels. They often appear with trapezoidal bodies, broad shoulders narrowing toward the waist. Some lack arms entirely. Others display exaggerated limbs or bent elbows. Faces vary, blank, dotted, or marked with simple lines. A few figures seem to wear headdresses or horn-like shapes, though their meaning remains uncertain. Alongside these figures are animals. Bighorn sheep most commonly, but also deer, birds, and forms that resist easy classification. Abstract elements recur throughout the site. Spirals carved deeply into stone, grid-like patterns, ladder shapes, and geometric blocks. Certain motifs appear again and again, as if they mattered enough to repeat but not enough to standardize. What makes McConkey Ranch particularly difficult to interpret is the absence of sequence. There is no clear beginning and no ending. Older carvings weather and soften, while newer ones cut sharply through the varnish. Yet later artists did not erase what came before. They worked around it. They responded to it. This layering suggests that the site was revisited across generations, possibly centuries, but it does not behave like a message being refined. It behaves like a conversation without closure. Some researchers interpret the figures symbolically rather than literally, representations of roles, states of being, or mythic concepts rather than individuals. Others suggest ritual or ceremonial contexts, possibly linked to altered states of consciousness. The spirals have been read as symbols of migration, water, seasonal cycles, or cosmological ideas. None of these explanations applies consistently across all panels. What is clear is effort. Creating these carvings required time, repeated strikes of stone against stone, and deliberate placement. Many figures are carved at eye level or higher, visible from a distance. This was not casual marking. It was public, persistent, and purposeful. Yet purpose does not guarantee legibility. McConkey Ranch preserves a form of meaning that survived without its instructions. The symbols remain, but the grammar is gone. What endures is not a text to be decoded, but evidence that communication mattered, even if it was never meant to be permanent, universal, or understood by anyone outside the moment it was made. If Range Creek Canyon raises questions about why people leave, McConkey Ranch raises a different one. Why speak so extensively in stone, without leaving a way to read what was said? 3. Buckhorn Wash, a memory without erasure. Buckhorn Wash cuts through the San Rafael Swell, a rugged corridor shaped by erosion and long distances between reliable water. The wash itself feels open and exposed, bordered by low cliffs and desert scrub. But along one extended rock face, the landscape changes character. Symbols begin to appear, then multiply, until the stone reads less like a wall and more like a layered record of presence, soul. What distinguishes Buckhorn Wash is not just the quantity of rock art, but its continuity. The panels stretch for hundreds of feet, accumulating images across centuries. You are not looking at a single cultural moment. You are looking at repeated return. The earliest figures are typically associated with what is known as the Barrier Canyon style. These forms are tall and elongated, often lacking arms or legs. Their bodies are narrow, their shoulders broad, their faces expressionless or hollow. They appear to float rather than stand. Even without precise dating, they feel ancient, less descriptive than symbolic, less human than conceptual. Later additions come from Fremont and Ute traditions. These images introduce more recognizable forms: bighorn sheep carved with curved horns, smaller human figures that appear active, sometimes holding weapons or positioned in hunting scenes. Footprints, handprints, and abstract symbols fill the spaces between larger figures. What is striking is how these different styles coexist. Newer carvings rarely destroy older ones. In many cases, later artists worked around existing figures, adjusting placement to avoid erasure. The wall becomes cumulative rather than competitive. This behavior suggests continuity rather than replacement. Buckhorn Wash was not abandoned and rediscovered. It remained meaningful. Different communities encountered the same surface and chose to add to it without removing what was already there. That choice carries weight. Rock art requires time and effort. Petroglyphs are made by pecking through dark desert varnish to reveal lighter stone beneath. Some figures are deeply carved with confident lines. Others are lighter, more tentative. The variation suggests different artists, different intentions, and different moments in time. The location itself offers context. Buckhorn Wash follows a natural travel corridor through the swell. Anyone moving through the region would have seen the panels. Their visibility implies that the images were meant to be encountered, not hidden. Interpretations vary. The site may have functioned as a landmark, a territorial marker, a teaching space, or a ceremonial focal point. The Barrier Canyon figures in particular resist practical explanation. Their abstraction and scale suggest ritual or cosmological significance rather than documentation of daily life. Despite decades of study, no single interpretation resolves the site, and that may be the point. Buckhorn Wash does not present a finished message. It presents persistence, a place where memory was not preserved through writing or monument, but through restraint, by allowing previous marks to remain visible. If McConkey Ranch raises the problem of unreadable language, Buckhorn Wash deepens it. What happens when meaning is preserved not by explanation, but by refusal to erase? 4. Hog-Up Cave. The same decision repeated for 6,000 years. Hog-Up Cave opens along the edge of Utah's Great Salt Lake Desert, carved into a limestone ridge overlooking a landscape defined by scarcity. Salt flats stretch outward, interrupted by marshes and shifting shorelines. Reliable water is never guaranteed. Temperatures fluctuate sharply. At first glance, it seems an unlikely place for long-term human use. Yet Hog-Up Cave tells a different story. Archaeological excavations revealed layers of occupation spanning from roughly 6000 BCE to around 1300 CE. Few sites in the Great Basin show such continuity. What makes Hagup especially valuable is not monumental architecture or ceremonial display, but preservation of the ordinary. The cave's dry environment protected organic materials that rarely survive elsewhere. Fragments of woven baskets, sandals, cordage, and plant fibers emerged from the soil. Among the most notable finds were moccasins made from sagebrush bark and animal hide, durable footwear designed for rough terrain and extreme conditions. Their construction changes subtly over time, reflecting shifts in mobility, environment, and technology. Stone tools appear throughout the layers: projectile points, scrapers, cutting implements. Their styles evolve, but they are not scattered randomly. Many show signs of repair or reuse. Hearths indicate repeated fires, yet there is little evidence of permanent structural investment. Hagup Cave was used again and again, but never built up. That pattern is the core mystery. For thousands of years, different groups made the same choice: stop here, use the shelter, then move on. The surrounding environment changed dramatically over that span. The Great Salt Lake expanded and contracted. Wetlands appeared and vanished. Resources shifted. Yet Hagup Cave remained relevant. One explanation lies in geography. The cave sits at a junction of ecological zones: desert, wetland, and upland. From this vantage point, groups could exploit multiple resources without committing to a single one. It functioned as a strategic pause point rather than a destination. Cultural boundaries complicate the picture. The artifacts do not belong to one clearly defined group. Instead, they reflect a sequence of traditions associated with the broader Great Basin, later overlapping with Fremont influences. Styles blend rather than replace one another, suggesting knowledge transfer rather than abrupt population change. This raises an unresolved question. Was Hagup Cave remembered? Did later groups know they were returning to a place used by their predecessors? Or was the cave rediscovered repeatedly because its position simply worked? The material record cannot answer that directly. It shows continuity, but not intention. Unlike rock art sites, Hagup Cave does not speak visually. Its story is buried, layered, and quiet. It preserves no symbols, no declarations of meaning, only evidence of repeated practical decisions. Hagup Cave challenges the assumption that longevity requires permanence. Here, endurance is built on movement, flexibility, and restraint. The same solution was chosen for 6,000 years, not because it was sacred or monumental, but because it remained useful. If Buckhorn Wash is about memory preserved without erasure, Hagup Cave is about survival preserved without settlement. It asks a simpler, more unsettling question: how much of human history is defined not by where people stayed, but by where they repeatedly chose not to? 5. 9 Mile Canyon, a museum without instructions. 9 Mile Canyon stretches across eastern Utah like a long, shallow corridor cut into stone. Despite its name, it extends for far more than 9 miles, threading through a landscape that appears empty at first glance. There are no monumental structures rising from the ground, no obvious centers of power, and yet the canyon contains one of the most extensive concentrations of rock art in North America. More than 10,000 images, petroglyphs, and pictographs line the canyon walls. They span thousands of years. Different styles, different techniques, and different symbolic systems overlap and coexist. What emerges is not a single site, but a sequence of returns. Figures appear and reappear: human forms, animals, hunting scenes, abstract patterns. Some images are carefully composed, balanced, and deliberate. Others seem almost casual, added in passing. Over time, the canyon becomes saturated with meaning, yet that meaning never resolves into a clear narrative. This density raises an immediate question: why here? 9 Mile Canyon is not the most fertile region in Utah. It does not offer the most reliable water, the richest soil, or the easiest travel. What it does offer is continuity. The canyon functions as a natural corridor through a challenging landscape, a route that would have been used repeatedly by groups moving between seasonal resources. Rock art in such corridors often serves multiple roles at once. It can mark passage, signal shared identity, record events, or reinforce memory. But in 9 Mile Canyon, the sheer accumulation complicates any single explanation. The imagery does not follow a consistent theme. Symbols recur, then disappear. Styles change, then return in altered form. There is no visible attempt to organize the panels into a structured archive. No effort to separate older images from newer ones. Later artists did not clear space or impose order. They added to what was already there. This suggests that meaning was not fixed. It evolved through repetition rather than standardization. The canyon wall functioned less like a message board and more like a living surface, one that absorbed intention without demanding clarity. Modern observers often refer to 9 Mile Canyon as an open-air museum, but museums typically guide interpretation. Labels explain context. Chronology is imposed. None of that exists here. The canyon offers evidence without instruction. Preservation adds another layer of tension. Increased awareness has brought increased visitation, and with it, damage. Some images have faded or been altered by contact. Others survive only because of the canyon's isolation. The very accessibility that allows study also threatens what remains. 9 Mile Canyon does not ask to be decoded completely. It resists simplification. Its mystery lies not in a single symbol or scene, but in scale. Thousands of images created by many hands across vast spans of time without ever settling on a final statement. If Hog Up Cave shows how decisions can repeat without settlement, 9 Mile Canyon shows how expression can accumulate without conclusion. It preserves the evidence of thought, belief, and presence, while withholding the framework needed to make them legible. 6. Parowan Gap: Stone, Sun, and the Limits of Interpretation. Parowan Gap is a narrow break in a line of red sandstone hills in southwestern Utah. From a distance, it appears unremarkable, a natural passage shaped by erosion. But as the land tightens and the rock walls draw closer, the stone surface begins to change. Symbols appear, then multiply, carved directly into the cliff faces that frame the gap. Petroglyphs cluster densely around this natural corridor. Human figures, animals, spirals, grids, and abstract forms cover the rock, concentrated far more heavily here than in the surrounding landscape. The placement alone suggests intention. This was not a random surface chosen for decoration, it was a focal point. What has drawn the most attention, however, is not simply what was carved, but where it points. Several carvings appear to align with solar events. Lines and symbols correspond to the position of the sun during solstices and equinoxes, casting shadows or catching light at specific times of year. These alignments have led some researchers to propose that Parowan Gap functioned as a form of solar marker, a way of tracking seasonal change in a landscape where timing mattered. In arid environments, knowing when to plant, hunt, or move could mean survival. A system that marks solar cycles would have been valuable. The idea of a stone calendar is therefore appealing. But the evidence resists certainty. Not all symbols align cleanly with solar events. Some appear unrelated to light and shadow entirely. Others repeat motifs found far from Parowan Gap, where no astronomical interpretation has been proposed. This raises a critical question: how much of what we see is intentional design, and how much is pattern imposed by modern observers searching for order? Archaeology operates within limits. Humans are skilled at recognizing alignment and meaning, even when coincidence plays a role. In sites like Parowan Gap, interpretation balances on a narrow edge. Dismissing the astronomical connection entirely ignores the clear relationship between some symbols and solar movement. Embracing it too fully risks projecting precision that may never have existed. The location itself adds weight to the mystery. Parowan Gap sits along natural travel routes and near water sources. It would have been encountered repeatedly by groups moving through the region. Rock art placed here would be seen again and again, at different times of year, under different light conditions. That repetition matters. Symbols revealed only at certain moments, when the sun reaches a particular height, create experience rather than instruction. The meaning may not have been informational but experiential, not a calendar to be read but a pattern to be witnessed. Parowan Gap ultimately challenges a familiar impulse, the desire to resolve ambiguity with function. Was it a solar observatory, a ceremonial gathering point, a symbolic threshold between places? The evidence allows multiple interpretations but confirms none. What remains is a reminder of restraint. Some systems were not designed to be decoded long after their makers were gone. They were designed to work in the moment, within a shared understanding that vanished when the community did. If 9 Mile Canyon overwhelms with meaning, Parowan Gap unsettles by precision that almost but never quite explains itself. 7. Sago Canyon, 3 traditions, 1 wall. Sago Canyon lies just outside the town of Thompson Springs in eastern Utah, where a narrow drainage cuts into sandstone cliffs. At first glance, it appears similar to many rock art sites scattered across the region. But as the panels come into view, a deeper complexity emerges. On the same canyon walls, 3 distinct artistic traditions coexist. The earliest figures are associated with the Barrier Canyon style. These forms are immediately striking. Tall, elongated bodies dominate the rock surface. Limbs are often absent or reduced. Eyes appear hollow or exaggerated. The figures seem less like representations of people and more like presences, abstract, imposing, and difficult to categorize. They do not depict daily life. They resist narrative. Layered among these older images are Fremont petroglyphs. These introduce a different visual language. Human figures become more grounded. Animals, especially bighorn sheep, appear with recognizable anatomy. The imagery feels more connected to subsistence and lived experience. Still later, Ute carvings add yet another layer, incorporating symbols and forms linked to historic indigenous traditions. What makes Sago Canyon unusual is not simply that these styles exist in the same place, but that they exist together. Later artists did not erase earlier figures. They did not cover them completely or carve over them indiscriminately. In many cases, newer images were placed beside or around older ones, as if acknowledging their presence. The wall becomes a shared surface rather than a contested one. This behavior raises a central question: why did multiple cultural traditions choose to use the same location? One explanation is geography. Sago Canyon sits along natural travel routes through a challenging landscape. Water, shelter, and passage converge here. Such places often attract repeated use, but geography alone does not explain the artistic restraint. Practical sites are frequently reused without symbolic continuity. Another possibility is significance carried forward through memory. The earliest figures may have marked the canyon as meaningful long before later groups arrived. Even without knowing the original intent, subsequent visitors may have recognized the place as special and responded by adding their own marks rather than replacing what was already there. The Barrier Canyon figures intensify this interpretation. Their scale and abstraction suggest ritual or cosmological importance. They do not function as records. They function as anchors, images meant to command attention rather than convey information. Sago Canyon therefore challenges the assumption that cultural succession always involves replacement. Here, continuity takes a quieter form. Different peoples shared a surface, a location, and perhaps a sense of restraint. Meaning was not standardized, but it was respected. The result is a wall that resists resolution. It does not belong fully to any single tradition. It documents no clear transition. Instead, it preserves evidence of coexistence across time. If Parowan Gap exposes the limits of interpretation, Sago Canyon exposes the limits of cultural boundaries. It suggests that some places carry enough weight to be inherited, not as territory, but as memory. 8. Newspaper Rock, a record without a reader. Newspaper Rock stands along a sandstone cliff in southeastern Utah, its surface densely covered with carvings. At a distance, the panel appears textured, almost patterned. Up close, individual figures begin to separate, then multiply, until the rock face feels saturated with marks. More than 600 petroglyphs cover this single surface. They were carved over many centuries by different groups, using the same stone as a canvas for expression. Animals dominate much of the imagery: bighorn sheep, deer, birds, and other forms rendered with varying degrees of detail. Human figures appear intermittently, alongside footprints, weapons, and abstract shapes. The site's modern name reflects a common reaction. The carvings resemble a page filled with symbols, as if they record events or stories. Yet unlike written language, there is no visible order, no margins, no beginning or end. Images are placed beside one another without obvious hierarchy, much. This absence of structure is the mystery. If newspaper rock was meant to record information, it does so without clarity. Scenes do not resolve into narratives. Symbols are not grouped consistently. Repetition occurs, but not in predictable sequences. Whatever system guided the creation of these images did not require linear reading. One possibility is that the panel functioned as a communal memory surface rather than a document. Each group added what mattered to them: animals hunted, journeys taken, identities asserted, without concern for coherence beyond the moment of creation. Meaning may have existed locally, shared among those present, without any expectation of permanence or legibility. The location supports this interpretation. Newspaper rock sits near natural travel routes and water sources. It would have been encountered repeatedly by people moving through the region. A surface seen again and again invites addition. Over time, accumulation replaces composition. What is notably absent from the panel is just as revealing. There are no clear indicators of European contact. No horses, no crosses, no firearms. This anchors the imagery firmly in a pre-contact world, shaped entirely by indigenous presence and priorities. Preservation complicates the story. The rock's accessibility has allowed generations of viewers to stand close enough to trace the carvings with their eyes, and sometimes with their hands. Some damage has occurred, lines have softened, context has thinned. Each alteration further distances the present from the past. Newspaper rock does not explain itself. It does not offer translation or closure. It offers density, evidence of repeated expression without instruction. If Sago Canyon shows how multiple traditions can share a wall without conflict, newspaper rock shows how meaning can accumulate until it overwhelms interpretation. The panel survives, the intention does not. Asol! It is not a message waiting to be decoded. It is proof that recording mattered, even if understanding was never meant to extend beyond the people who stood here at the time. 9. Danger Cave, 11,000 years without a revolution. Danger Cave opens along the edge of Utah's Great Salt Lake Desert, overlooking a landscape that has shifted dramatically since the end of the last ice age. Today it appears harsh and exposed, bordered by salt flats and sparse vegetation. Yet beneath its shallow overhang lies one of the longest continuous records of human presence in North America. Archaeological evidence indicates that Danger Cave was used intermittently for more than 11,000 years. That span alone is extraordinary. But what makes the site unsettling is not how much changed over that time, but how little. Layer after layer reveals tools, hearths, and debris associated with daily life. Projectile points evolve in shape and size. Materials shift as environments change. Diets adjust to fluctuating lake levels and available resources. Yet there is no sharp break. No moment of sudden innovation. No clear transition that could be labeled a civilizational leap. The people who used Danger Cave adapted continuously, not dramatically. This challenges a deeply ingrained modern expectation. History is often framed as a series of revolutions: agriculture replacing foraging, villages replacing mobility, complexity replacing simplicity. Danger Cave does not fit that narrative. Instead, it presents adaptation as a steady process, guided by observation rather than transformation. As the Great Salt Lake expanded and contracted, the surrounding environment alternated between wetland and desert. Resources appeared, disappeared, and returned in altered form. Each change demanded response. The archaeological record shows that people adjusted hunting strategies, toolkits, and movement patterns accordingly. What it does not show is abandonment. Unlike Range Creek Canyon, where a functioning system was eventually left behind, Danger Cave remained relevant across millennia. It was never built into a permanent settlement. It never became monumental. It simply continued to work. This continuity raises a difficult question. If people could adapt so effectively without settling, without constructing durable architecture, and without formalizing social hierarchies, then what exactly defines progress? Danger Cave suggests that stability does not require permanence. Knowledge can be preserved through practice rather than structure. Skills can be transmitted without writing. Memory can survive through repetition rather than record. The absence of dramatic change is not evidence of stagnation, it is evidence of success. Yet this success leaves little for historians to name. There is no single culture to label, no clear endpoint to mark. The cave story resists summary because it was never designed to culminate in something else. Danger Cave forces a recalibration of scale. When survival extends across 11,000 years without a revolution, the problem is not explaining why people fail to change, but why modern narratives insist that change must always look spectacular. If newspaper rock overwhelms with expression and Sego Canyon complicates cultural boundaries, Danger Cave strips the mystery down to its core: endurance without transformation. 10. All-American Man Pictograph, presence without explanation. On a remote rock face within the Canyonlands region of Utah stands a single figure that resists context. The image is commonly referred to as the All-American Man, a towering pictograph rising nearly 3 meters high. It is not surrounded by dense panels. It is not embedded within a narrative scene. It stands largely alone. The figure is unmistakably human in outline, yet abstract in execution. Its proportions are exaggerated. Limbs are simplified. The body dominates the surface on which it was placed. There are no accompanying animals, no tools, no obvious environmental cues that explain why this location was chosen or what event the image commemorates. That isolation is the mystery. Most rock art sites gain meaning through accumulation, layers of symbols, repeated motifs, or shared surfaces used over time. The All-American Man does the opposite. It asserts itself through scale rather than repetition. It does not invite dialogue, it commands attention. Its cultural attribution remains debated. The pictograph does not align cleanly with a single tradition, and the absence of surrounding imagery limits comparative analysis. Without associated artifacts or structures, archaeologists must rely on style, placement, and weathering to infer age and purpose. Those indicators suggest antiquity, but not intention. Several interpretations have been proposed. The figure may represent a mythic or ancestral being, a protective presence tied to the land rather than a depiction of an individual. It could mark territory, signaling identity or boundary in a way that did not require explanation to those who recognized it. Others have suggested ceremonial or spiritual significance, an image meant to be encountered rather than understood. What unites these interpretations is uncertainty. The figure's placement heightens that effect. Positioned to be seen from a distance, it engages the landscape rather than a specific viewer. It does not demand close inspection, it demands acknowledgement. The land itself becomes part of the image's meaning. Unlike Parawan Gap, where interpretation teeters between design and projection, or McConkey Ranch, where symbols multiply beyond translation, the All-American Man offers almost nothing to analyze beyond its existence. There is no system to reconstruct, no sequence to follow. And yet, the choice to create something so large, so singular, and so enduring carries weight. Pigment had to be prepared, the surface selected, the figure executed with confidence. This was not an accident. The pictograph does not explain itself because it may never have been intended to. Its power lies in presence. It marks a place as meaningful without specifying why. It survives as a reminder that not all expressions are communicative in the modern sense. Some marks are made to record, some to teach, some simply to exist. The All-American Man belongs to the last category. It closes the sequence of Utah's mysteries not with accumulation, but with restraint, an image that refuses narrative and leaves only a question of intention behind. when meaning refuses to remain. Taken individually, none of these 10 sites overturn established archaeology. They do not prove lost super-civilizations, forbidden knowledge, or forgotten empires that once ruled the land. That is not their role. Their significance lies elsewhere. Across Utah, a consistent pattern emerges. People built carefully, marked deliberately, returned repeatedly, and then stepped away. They did not reinforce their presence with permanence. They did not leave instructions for the future. Meaning was activated through action, not preserved through explanation. When the necessary moment passed, what remained was allowed to endure without interpretation. This challenges a modern instinct. We tend to measure importance by scale, survival, and clarity. We expect complexity to accumulate and meaning to be archived. Utah's ancient record suggests a different logic. Here, sophistication often appears in restraint. Knowledge was practiced, not documented. Memory lived in movement, not in monuments. Granaries remained sealed when they were no longer needed. Symbols multiplied without converging into language. Shelters were reused across millennia without becoming cities. Art survived while its context faded. In each case, what endures is not failure, but incompleteness. This does not weaken archaeology. It defines it. History is not a full transcript of the past. It is a reconstruction assembled from what the land allowed to survive. In Utah, erosion, isolation, and silence shaped that survival as much as human intention. Context disappeared faster than stone. Interpretation raced ahead of certainty. These sites do not ask us to replace science with speculation. They ask for intellectual humility. They remind us that entire systems of knowledge can exist, function, and disappear without ever being designed to explain themselves to those who come later. Perhaps the most honest conclusion is not an answer, but a recognition. Some stories were never meant to remain intact. And when meaning refuses to remain, what we are left with is not mystery as failure, but mystery as inheritance.